Good afternoon. Are we in? Good afternoon. I believe we're live. Welcome to Verbalist number 7. If you can just start waving and thumbs up in, and or double thumbs up if anyone wants to do that. Hearting, all the rest of it, so I know who's in the house. Hiya, Jeff. Um, okay, we've got a couple of people in the house. Right, before we go into our first clue, we've got a couple of competitions running today. One of them is the usual kind of mystery extracts from an autobiography or something of that ilk. And the other one is actually relates to the extracts from one of the books that we're kind of featuring, which is Charlie Hill's memoir, I Don't Want to Go to the Taj Mahal. So that's coming up later on. So first of all, the mystery autobiography, except it's not. It's actually from an interview. Hiya, Louise. Hiya, Saj. Hiya, Ian. Evening. Okay, so here's the first clue. I do object to one thing to do with sex. This scheme afoot on the part of many liberal-minded persons to open up obscene language to general commerce. It should be the dark secret language of the underworld. There are very few words. You shouldn't kill them by overuse. Okay, so that's the first clue. Hi, Kerry. And just hazard a guess. Obviously you haven't got much to go on so far. I'm going to give you the next one in a little bit. So we're going to start today, seeing as we're in a kind of fictive mood with Kerry's short story coming up today and Charlie's memoir. I'm going to start with a book which some of you may or may not know, and it's called Saturday Night at the Greyhound. It's written by John Hampson, who's a Birmingham author. This is from the 1930s. Yeah, published by the Hogarth Press. So it's published by Leonard and Virginia Woolf, I think, originally. And it was a book that was greatly admired at the time. Graham Greene was an admirer, W.H. Auden, people like that. It's basically 24 hours in this Midlands pub. And originally it was written as a play, and he didn't have any success selling that. So he changed it into a novel. This is how it starts. It's still in print, by the way, so it's well worth getting hold of. Mrs. Tappin sat by the kitchen fireplace. Soon, she knew, it would be 4 o'clock. For another half an hour she would sit close to the kitchen fire and think. Mrs. Tappin had no use for books. They only told of soft people who did not exist. Mrs. Tappin loved four things: money, gossip, thinking, and Clara. She did not worry about any of these four things, though. Whatever happened was food for thought. Of her own foresight she was proud, for things nearly always happened as she expected them to. These folks here now, the landlord's wife and her brother. Mrs. Tappin chuckled grimly. She'd seen 14 men take over the Greyhound Inn in her time. 14, and not one of them had made it pay. Scarcely kept them with food in their bellies, let alone clothes on their back. Even old Dalkin, who tried to farm the 7 poor acres of land, had had to admit defeat and clear out broken. The Skelp family, too. They fled on a pitch-black night, leaving chaos in the house, owing everybody money. The owning brewers had only just saved the licence that time. Mrs. Tappin giggled at the remembrance. Life was like that, always playing tricks. A sense of the funny side made life interesting. That the present landlord, a drunken townsman of shady repute, expected to make a living and more out of the Grove Lace villagers, amused Mrs. Tappin splendidly. But she kept her joy secret. Fools believe in their folly and expect others to do the same. Okay, so I do urge you to investigate John Hampson's Saturday Night at the Greyhound, a Birmingham author, and I would venture to say written from a lot more lived experience than, say, someone like Henry Green, who's much better known from that kind of era. Okay, so we're going to have a shot of, I put this out on Facebook a few months back earlier on in lockdown, and I was doing that book thing, which I never finished. But this, just to give us all a boost of energy, this is from Tropic of Capricorn. This is Henry Miller, and I'm going to give you this. I sat riveted to my desk and I travelled around the world at lightning speed. And I learned that everywhere it is the same. Hunger, humiliation, ignorance, vice, greed, extortion, chicanery, torture, despotism, the inhumanity of man to man, the fetters, the harness, the halter, the bridle, the whip, the spurs. The finer the caliber, the worse off the men. Men were walking around the streets of New York in that bloody degrading outfit, the despised, the lowest of the low, walking around like orcs, like penguins, like oxen, like trained seals, like patient donkeys, like big jackasses, like crazy gorillas, like docile maniacs nibbling at the dangling bait, like waltzing mice, like guinea pigs, like squirrels, like rabbits, and many a one was fit to govern the world, to write the greatest book ever written. When I think of some of the Persians, the Hindus, the Arabs I knew, when I think of the character they revealed, their grace, their tenderness, their intelligence, their holiness, I spit on the white conquerors of the world, the degenerate British, the pig-headed Germans, the smug, self-satisfied French. The earth is one great sentient being, a planet saturated through and through with man, a live planet expressing itself falteringly and stutteringly. It is not the home of the white race, or the black race, or the yellow race, or the lost blue race, but the home of man, and all men are equal before God, and will have their chance, if not now, then 1,000,000 years hence. The little brown brothers of the Philippines may bloom again one day, and the murdered Indians of America North and South may also come alive one day to ride the plains, where now the cities stand belching fire and pestilence. Who has the last say? Man. The earth is his because he is the earth. Its fire, its water, its air, its mineral and vegetable matter, its spirit, which is cosmic, which is imperishable, which is the spirit of all the planets, which transforms itself through him, through endless signs and symbols, through endless manifestations. Wait, you cosmocopic telegraph shits, you demons on high waiting for the plumbing to be repaired. Wait, you dirty white conquerors who have sullied the earth with your cloven hooves, your instruments, your weapons, your disease germs. Wait, all of you who are sitting in clover and counting your coppers. It is not the end. The last man will have his say before it is finished. Down to the last sentient being, down to the last sentient molecule, justice must be done and will be done. Okay, so that was when he was working at the Western Union Telegraph Company, by the way.
Why do you like that poem, Al?
It's not a poem, it's from Tropic of Capricorn.
Sorry,
it's just that I think one of the reasons Henry Miller's so inspiring is that if you look at his really early books, which were never published and have only been published because he became a name, they're terrible, and you see that he propels himself forward by his pure desire to become a writer, and you have to travel on that journey with him, and you get this immense kind of rhapsodic lyrical energy that is impossible to resist, I find. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sorry. I thought it was a poem. I just walked in, so excuse me.
It's
I was asking you because I wanted to know what you were actually reading. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's cool. In fact...
Is he studied as much now? Is he trendy?
I don't know. I think he's kind of fallen out of favour, but I hope that both Henry and Anais and you know, a lot of other writers from that era come back into fashion. Right, we're going to riff into the next section. I've got a poem that I've only just recently discovered, and it's by an American poet, and I believe it was only published a few days ago. Okay, I'm just looking for my bio on her because she's relatively new to me. Her name is Daria-Ann Martineau. Okay, I'm going to read the poem first, and I'm going to tell you what she says about it. Just because I want you to kind of savor and experience this. It's called Carnivorous with a Varied and Opportunistic Diet. Call me Lagahu, Sushayan, call me Other. I came ravenous, mongoose consuming fresh landscapes until I made myself new species of the Indies. Christen me how you wish, my muzzle matted with blood of fresh invertebrates. I disappear your problems without thought to consequence. Call me Obaha. Watch me cut through cane, chase sugar-hungry rats. Giggling at mating season, I grow fats, multiples, litters thick as tropic air. Don't you find me beautiful? My soft animal features, this body streamlined, ruthless claws that won't retract. You desire them. You never ask me what I want. I take your chickens, your iguana. You watch me and wonder when you will be outnumbered. My offspring stalking your village, ecosystems uprooted, roosts swallowed whole. I am not native, not domesticated. I am naturalized, resistant to snake venoms, your colonies' toxins, everything you brought me to, this land. I chew and spit back, reptile and bird bone, prophecy strewn across stones. Okay, Daria-Ann Martineau says, I wrote the poem shortly after reading Safia Sinclair's Cannibal. As both an immigrant and a descendant of slaves, she was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago. I thought about how we survive when imperialist systems force us into new environments. Also, what are the unintended consequences for the colonizers when they create these disturbances?
What lines do you like from that? What lines stand out for you?
I can't really pick out one line because it seems so all of a piece. That was what kind of attracted me or drew me to it, really. And I like poems that are short, and this kind of felt like the speaking voice was very much you're flung into the situation straight away.
Her name again?
So Daria-Ann Martineau, she's the founder of Print, which is Poets Reclaiming Immigrant Narratives and Text. She lives in Washington, D.C., where she is working on her first manuscript. And you can read that poem and hear her reading it much better than
Brilliant.
than
It's
I.
brilliant to hear her voice.
Yeah, you've got to hear her deliver that, and that's poets.org. I'll try and put all these links
sort of
on.
bounces, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Her
You need
Trinidadian accent comes.
That's by the way, for those of you who haven't tuned in before, this is Victoria in the back. It doesn't want to come before the camera, but have you got some poems, some Spanish poems for us later
today,
on?
I haven't.
Okay, but Victoria's our resident Spanish-speaking poet archivist or poem archivist.
Yeah.
Okay, right. On with the show. I want to introduce you to another poet, a British poet, who you may or may not be familiar with, called Fran Lock, and she kind of links to the Charlie Hill book because she's reviewed it for Culture Matters. So I suggest you have a look at that because also there's a lot of her work up there. The thing I liked about it, she sent me this really long biog. I'm not going to read you all of it. It's a great biog, but what I liked about it most of all is that she spent a bit of time telling me that she's a sometime itinerant dog whisperer, and then she sent me a picture of her dog for some reason, and I sent a picture of my dog back. So it's nice to have all that So it's not just all about books. Her latest collection of poetry is called Raptures and Captures. That's published by Culture Matters in conjunction with collage artist Steve Burgess. And also another volume contains Mild Peril, Outspoken Press 2019. She's published about seven poetry collections so far and numerous chapbooks. And she, along with Jane Byrne, she's the editor of Witches, Warriors, Workers, an anthology of contemporary working women's poetry. And she tells me that if her writing is for anything, it's for carving out a space for working class women and girls in language and in literature, not to perform some shit exploded version of class identity, but as themselves in all their difficulty, diversity and difference. Right, this poem is from early on in lockdown. It's dedicated to Dominic Cummings and it's called Vulnerable. Vulnerable by Fran Lock. In the not quite kilted moments, just before morning makes disorder of the wreck, I grind my teeth on you. No classic sweet, alas, no hyacinth here, private and wild, no wood, or only the mongrel copse, complete with mottled pong of piss and dog between the railway track and off-white hospital. Ruin is a word for teeth round here, or for the cold, congealing meat of suppers spoilt. And where a dark ingress breeze welcome wet, the damp ground waxes nettles, whispers threats in broken glass and rusted wire, air alive with flies. But still, women come with shining eyes to spread a checkered blanket down and name the errants of the hedge, pigeon, flinch and tit and sparrow, laughingly to children. And who amongst them now has gran or job or benefit or friend or car? Women who fall between or can't afford to work and cost of not, measured in evictions. There are those who have no one. There are those who have, whose escape extends no further than the balcony. Long sleeves in summer so the bruises don't show. There are no fucking castles here. Cheap masks through which a bilious argot strains. There's a queue for the shops an hour long. Gym equipment poking up through uncut grass like spiky flowers. There's women pushing buggies, pushing swings, thronging on this fickle dip of land between dog end and dog shit, making do. And you, eyes half shut and lousy with calculation, cut a word from all our meaning skin, vulnerable. I have other words for you, but no, I prefer the mother holding a dog Daisy out to her child on our scrap of paradise, a buccaneer hope. Tremendous, vulnerable, Fran Lock.
Al, just beforehand, do you want to say hi to Louise, Kerry, Stanley Parker Lock, Sarah Bing Brighton, Cabaret Spielroom, and Jim Fogarty, Robert Powell.
I don't want to move this comments
Steve
thing
Weir.
because I'm worried that something.
No, don't.
Being the
But do you want to say
technophobe that
hello
I
to them?
am. Yeah, hello everyone. So thanks a lot for tuning in. Right now, if I can find my place here, we're gonna. I've kind of resisted doing this poem because it's a poem that I've never actually performed, and it almost felt like because it's based on something that happened that it was some kind of an intrusion to. It's that writer's thing about writing about real stuff, really painful stuff that affects other people. But when me and Victoria lived in Smethwick for about 15 years, a number of years back, one day the area was all cordoned off, the brook at the end of the road, and a 6-month-old baby was found in the brook, wrapped in a dustbin bag inside a JD plastic sports bag. Troy Simpson been abducted by his father and dumped there. And this is a poem that I wrote in response, not just to that, but the kind of the atmosphere of living in Smellick at that time, and it's called Helicopter. I cannot get the rain to go, it won't fall upwards. I'm banging my head on this gate or wall in summer says as much to me tonight as half the poets will. I put out food on the stairs so she shall trip and bite at fingers when they come to reach me. I have foreshortened the bloody Nile into a text so as not to see it. And all the six-wired birds of paradise, these lovely 10-day-olds, these pups of sleeping brood of bitch should know no better. But tonight, the incessant helicopter plays up ahead, oblivious and wrong. The page just frays and scuttles. The baby in the brook is dead. So that one is dedicated to the Troy Simpson, wherever you are. Okay, here's another one that I resisted doing. If you resist doing, don't do that. Just fling yourself into it. So I'm going for it today, and it's called a late night good example. I'm warning you. I did some of my lockdown stuff last week. I'm going. This is from the archive. I've even got something from. I even found floppy disks. So I've got some stuff from you. You know, from that. This one's called a late night good example. Another late night round of bare knuckle fighting without recourse to bets or blows. She wants out to Argentine or other vista. I want out but do not know to where. Our daughter is alone in the playground reading Tom Sawyer. Few things are harder to put up with than a good example, as the great man said. It'll be the same for him when he's older, same as was for you, me, my mother. They hate anyone who's different. She thinks we're here forever in some relegation dogfight on the tired same stone of street. We fight on while my colon gives me grief. In the dark, I sit for hours after, powerless or punch drunk, before I climb, not knowing which of us is scared or daft or stoic. And then I dream of pea shooters and enormous slides and sups of ale, but with them are the mood and mind of trouble. I wake and see the sunlit shrouded hunks of park in dew and mist and morning. Blimey, that's from 2012. Okay, right, it's time to hit you with these extracts from Charlie Hill's forthcoming memoir. I don't really know Charlie that well, but I've kind of bumped into him. I keep bumping into him over the years. And I think the first time I met him was when I was fundraising for shelter, and I knocked his door to ask him to kind of sign up to a regular support, and we got talking, and we found that we'd both been published by Tyndall Street Press.
Which has now disbanded, hasn't it? When did it close? When did it finish?
It's got to be about at least 10 years ago. I'm sure I'm wrong there, but yeah, sadly it's been that's been bought up by a major. But his work, he's written a lot now. So this is his fourth book. His first book's called The Space Between Things, and there's a couple that have followed that. Books, which is a more commercial venture, and then Stuff, which is a novella, quite a plotless novella. But he's been going for a few years, and I think in terms of the door-to-door thing, I think at one point I'm right in saying he actually went around knocking doors of the area that the first book, Space Between Things, was kind of about, Moseley, to try and sell his books with. That's the kind of thing that I can imagine Henry Miller would have done. So enough respect for that, and he's greatly rated by the likes of Jim Cray, Stuart Home, Jonathan Coe, Natalie Haynes, and you've got to get a hold of a copy of this. And I believe that in terms of probably helping Charlie out the most, the best way of doing that would be to do it via Waterstones. And in one of these extracts, there is a prize. I'm going to give you clue 2 from quiz that I'm running, but there's 2 quizzes running. So the second one is related to one of these extracts. Right, get on with it, Al. So this is a vision of drinking, drugs, culture, sex, politics and masculinity in the Midlands in the 80s and 90s. That's what the blurb says anyway. Okay, first extract. This is from I Don't Want to Go to Taj Mahal, Charlie Hill. Working in a Victorian factory in Digbeth that made pelmets and curtain accessories, I bet every day with poor Irishmen in Bartlett's bookies. During my first shift, I noticed a strong smell of almonds, so I asked the gaffer, a bull of a man with mildewed shirt cuffs and dried egg yolk on his tie, what it was. He pointed to 2 enormous open vats in the middle of the floor and said, "Those are cyanide baths." And I heard them hissing. I worked with a Brummie who supported Lincoln City because you can get closer to the action than a First Division club, and he was astute. Seeing that my heart lay in something other than counting tunnel brackets, he bet me a fiver he could count more in a day, a challenge I accepted, once at any rate. Later, I volunteered to drive a forklift because it was the best of a shit job. All of the weight in a forklift, the battery, the engine, is at the rear end. Like a child in a toy, I reversed it down a ramp. The weight took it out of my control and it toppled slowly off the edge. The only thing that stopped the forklift from going over on its side with me underneath, crushed bones into concrete, was a metal post that bent to 45 degrees and left it balancing on the edge of the ramp like a metaphor. Not that I had much time for metaphor at Harrison Drape. Okay, so the quiz that we're running with Charlie's book is referring to the counting tunnel brackets and taking on that bet. How many do you think he counted? And the winner is whoever can get closest to the number. So punch your numbers in, please. Victoria, if you can sort of tell me what people are guessing, and I'll give you the second extract from the book. I'm a Christmas temper H. Samuel, the high street jeweller, where a fellow called Tahir puts me straight about the low quality of Pakistani gold, and someone with blonde hair and blue eyes who looks after the Raymond vials but is lacking in certain deductive skills tries to sell me a part share of a holiday apartment in Fuengirola. Have I said that wrong?
Fuengirola.
Fuengirola.
No, Fuengirola.
Right. Listen to Victoria, don't listen to me. Another temp lives in a tower block in 5 ways. I go back to Hisman and I'm told that people who use rolling tobacco in their spliffs are amateurs. At lunchtime, I see him in the storeroom, filling a sports bag full of watches and alarm clocks, which he later passes to an old woman, hard bitten. If I hadn't been stoned, I might have said something to someone, though I think in retrospect, that's unlikely. 3. This hasn't been called from the book, so these run together as linked extracts like this in the memoir. Interviewed for a registered general nursing diploma, I have a plan to show I'm under no illusions about how hard I'll have to work, and that I haven't decided to do it just so I can get a qualification, although this is certainly uppermost in my mind. I know it's a very dirty business, I say, and I'm perfectly happy clearing up shit. And then, I don't mind clearing shit up at all. I know that's a big part of the job, the shit. Any questions? They ask at the end, perplexed. Not really, I say, persevering about a week before I don't get an offer because they think I have some sort of shit fetish. I just want you to know I don't mind wiping bottoms and I'm prepared to get stuck in with the cleaning up of all the shit. 4. New Year's Eve, after the pub, I'm escorted round the back of an independent bakery, Luca's in Moseley, by a woman uninterested in pastries. I'm being forced up against a pile of pallets when the security lights come on and she bails, a circumstance that leads me to question my hitherto rock-solid antipathy to the nascent surveillance state. 5. First love. One day, shortly after the longest Christmas on record, there was a heavy fall of snow in the southwest. I don't want to go to work today, I said, and she said, you don't have to. Tell them you went to Devon for the weekend and can't get back. So I rang a civil servant in the office where I'd just been promoted and told him I was snowbound in Tavistock. We spent the morning warm under the blankets, feeding each other fresh strawberries dipped in cream, mouth to mouth. Later, there was a cosmic blessing. The clouds above the city opened and dropped flowers of snow onto streets of cars and terraced houses, and we went for a walk down the middle of Willows Road, linking arms like the freewheeling Dylan and Suze. 6. Publication. At the first time of asking, the Observer magazine pays a third of my monthly take-home for a rant about civil servants being unable to think for themselves. I do some sums and calculate that if I sell 3 of these freelance pieces a month, I'll never have to work again. So I pack my civil service job in, buy an electric typewriter and get to it. 7. Final extract. It was my 20th summer. It was my 40th year to heaven. What's that Dylan Thomas poem? I love the... yeah, shut up, Al. Dylan Thomas reading his own poetry because he sounds so goddamn English, doesn't he? It was my 20th summer and I was living with a woman in Handsworth Wood and having doubts about our compatibility, including but not confined to her liking for our cafe facet knitwear. I played cricket for the second team at Moseley Ashfield, Moheen Ali's club, and went on a tour to the New Forest. The first night I appropriated a straw boater from behind the bar of a pub in Brockenhurst and met a girl who took me camping in a clearing that was a wild pony rat's run. We played pool together and drank English beers, but she read too much Terry Pratchett and there was nothing going on. I broke the bad news to my lover a week later. A week after that, my new friend visited to play pool and drink English beers. A misjudgment, it seems. My ex was furious and no one in the city believed a word I said. Cautionary tale. Okay, so especially bearing in mind that the launch of that book, which ties into kind of links to Kerry, because Kerry was kind of going to be in conversation with Charlie, and that launch was going to be this week and it's been cancelled. So get hold of a copy of it. It's only about...
So what's the question you asked? You asked them now again, Ricky.
Okay, so how many of anyone been guessing so far? So in the first extract, Charlie was talking about the tunnel bracket counting at Harrison Drake. So how many do you think he counted in that day where he took the bet on? Winner's the person that gets closest. Right, second extract from mine. This is a movie with about 2 or 3 plots going at the same time. Why not? Okay, so everyone encounters violence in some way or other. It so happens I did encounter it in quite an extreme way after the war. In the East End, when the fascists were coming back to life in England. I got into quite a few fights down there. If you look remotely like a Jew, you might be in trouble. Also, I went to a Jewish club by an old railway arch, and there were quite a lot of people, often waiting with broken milk bottles in a particular alley we used to walk through. There were 1 or 2 ways of getting out of it. One was a purely physical way, of course, but you couldn't do anything about the milk bottles. We didn't have any milk bottles. The best way was to talk to them, sort of, you all right? Yeah, I'm all right. Well, that's all right then, isn't it? And all the time keep walking towards the lights of the main road. Another thing, we were often taken for communists. If you went by or happened to be passing a fascist street meeting and looked in any way antagonistic, this was in Ridley Road Market near Dalston Junction, they'd interpret your very being, especially if you had books under your arms, as evidence of you being a communist. There was a good deal of violence there in those days. Okay, so that's the second clue.
Okay, some numbers have come. Cabaret Spielrun says 400. Jeff Harrison says 7,000. And he has no idea what a tunnel bracket is. And Louise says 1,701.
Okay, well, I'm not going to say who's closest out of those answers, but one of those answers is quite close. What I need to do now is to crack on with Kerry's story, because I think this is going to time out at 5-2. So I'm going to read. I hate poets who read from their phones during gigs, and I've never done that. But because I don't have a printer, my alternative was writing out the whole of Kerry's story, which I've done with the shorter pieces. But so So I'm going to read this from my phone. So my apologies to that.
That's a little unfair,
for that.
though. Why do you hate them not reading from the mobile?
I don't know. I just think I like kind of a very DIY sort of performance style, where you kind of throwing bits of paper around. And I'm a bit of a carrier bag fetishist, as you know, Victoria.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sea of plastic.
Okay, right. This story is called Fallen. Right. Let me tell you a little bit about Kerry. She's currently doing a PhD in creative writing, for which she's written another Black Country novel, which will be her third, called God's Country. So all of her work thus far is set in the Black Country. Her first novel is called The Black Country. It's published by Salt in 2015. And the last one, Gamble, which I was looking for earlier. I think I must have lent it to someone because I can't find it. And I haven't read The Black Country. I've read Gamble, and it's great. It's a page turner. In the sense that books generally aren't when they're called that, but it really is. And then one of my main interests is psychogeography and Black Country writing, and that's informs her PhD. She was nominated for the Encore Second Novel Award for Gamble. So you need to get hold. I'd recommend Gamble, but get hold of both of them. Anyway, this story's online. It's go to fictive and you'll find the whole thing. And it was inspired by watching a couple in a coffee shop after Kerry had been for a long walk by the canal. Okay, so here we go. Fallen. When they meet again, it's just not the same. Not to her, it isn't. How could it be, really? Even the place isn't the same. It's the same spot, but it isn't the same, is it? Everything has changed beyond easy recognition. This place they're in, it used to be quiet, cosy, she would say, intimate perhaps, not now. It has gone corporate, like all those places have these days. It's all faux leather fixed seating and mismatched tables and wooden flooring and noise. Oh, the noise, the clatter of crockery constantly. Now coffee has a culture, it seems to her. She doesn't really know what this is supposed to mean, culture, or the culturization of things. A lot of things puzzle her these days. The man sitting in front of her now, Ben, is not the man she knew. He is a matured version, a sepia version, a version tatty at the edges. She has ordered the drinks. He, Ben, has left his money, his card at home, and the waitress, is she Polish? Perhaps, yes, has said she will bring the drinks over. So they sit, the two of them, in this familiar, unfamiliar place of theirs, quietly, until Ben says, I didn't think you'd come. Thank you. I'm glad you got the letter. She barely hears it over the clattering and the sudden laughter from people sitting nearer the door. She basically reads his lips. Oh, she says. Well, of course, yes. The waitress comes over with a tray of their drinks. As she places the cups down in front of them, some of Ben's tea spills into the saucer and she apologises. Ben flashes a glance that is all too familiar and he all but waves her away. His sigh is audible even over the noise. When the waitress has gone, Ben says, What's that? He means, what are you drinking? Coffee, she says, a latte. They both stare at her cup, at the froth and the steam and the whiteness of it. He makes a face and shakes his head. None of that for me anymore, he says. I stick to this, chamomile. He pronounces it chamomile, and for some reason that jars with her. He taps his chest with the tips of his fingers and says, Coffee, bad for the old ticker. The cuff of his shirt is frayed, but his fingers, she notices, are still long, almost the same as before. Perhaps, she thinks, musicians' fingers always remain the same. Perhaps the constant practicing keeps them young. It makes her look at her own hands, which haven't kept so well. Veins like blue worms live under the skin there. She places her hands under the table, on her knees, conscious suddenly, not suddenly, conscious again perhaps, of the time that has passed. But he, Ben, sees her do it. You're wearing rings, he says, and his face rests in a way she almost recognises from before. I am, she says. Yes, but she keeps her hands on her knees out of sight, and then, you are not, she says, wearing rings, I mean. He straightens and she notices the sinews in his neck. He will have trimmed that beard this morning, she thinks, that grey beard. He will have combed that hair, what's left of it. I never married, he says. Mary and I, we never did. Mary. She receives the name, such a common noun, with all of its religious implications, like a stone in the face. She takes a sip of her latte, which tastes of nothing but heat. He leans forward. She is not wearing spectacles, but anyway, short-sighted. So the closer he gets, the clearer he becomes. And she can see clearer and clearer the depth of time in the lines around his eyes, along his forehead. He starts to speak. His eyes are still quite blue. He takes a little breath in as if he has an announcement to make, and then seems to change his mind and sits back. There is a paunch of flesh visible in a gape in the fabric of his shirt where a button is missing just above the waistband of his trousers. It makes her remember the sight of his flesh there. How long ago? How old were they? How old was she? I'm a widow, she says. She says it because it brings her back to where she is now, where she wants to be. And I had a child, but she's not sure she wants to tell him. His eyes, she notices, brighten, but only for a second. Mary died, he says. Quite suddenly, actually. No children. She never fell pregnant. He empties out his body. It deflates in front of her, and of course she thinks he might cry. She hopes he won't, and he doesn't. At her age, she has experienced the death of several loved ones, friends, relatives, not just her husband, but her child too. And her job, of course, taught her how to respond to death. She knows the things to say to others in those circumstances, but she cannot bring herself to say that she is sorry for his loss or that she understands what he must be feeling. So instead, she reaches across the table with her weathered hands and touches his. She wants to say, do you remember when we used to come here every Friday for how long? Do you remember that time, that last afternoon we had together? You must do. You must remember. But she does not. And anyway, Ben gathers himself. She watches him do it. She was the love of my life, he says. Says it as if it's a hard, cold fact. I travelled around the world with her. I lived in Paris for a while and then in Canada. His voice trails. I travelled around the world with her. There was never any pressure to... He looks at her then. And then suddenly, she died. And he moves his arms, his hands, like a magician. It looks quite bizarre. And his face is full of a look close to terror. And when he breathes, she can hear it like air passing through water. She wants to remember him as he was all those years ago. For the first time in years, she pictures the last time she saw him. They had had coffee here in this place, here. It was a greasy spoon then, and the coffee was dreadful, and the scones were stale. But that made it all the more illicit, really. He had suggested it, that they go back to his room. It is all coming back to her now, the excitement of that suggestion. She feels her face, her cheeks, her ears become hot with the thought of it. And you, he says, and it brings her back to him now. You're a widow. Ben, she notices, takes a gulp of his chamomile tea, and she hears him swallow as if it is difficult to do so. He was my second husband, she says. I was married to Richard before that, but you were married twice, he says. There in the corner of his mouth, a collection of something forming, spittle, something brownish. It seems ridiculous to her to answer, and anyway, yes, she's been married twice, so what? You can't have fallen in love with both of them, he says. Says fallen in love in an entirely different tone of voice, an entirely different accent. It makes her wish she'd been married 6, 7, 8 times even, and that she could list the names of all the men and women, yes, let there be women, with whom she had slept in the 40 odd years since they had last met. 40 years ago, more than that. He had driven her to his room, the room he rented from Mary, and his single bed had been in need of a new mattress, and the duvet held his smell, and she had seen the pile of books on the bedside table, the ones she had recommended he read, and they had spent the last afternoon together, and she had said it, because it had been a reckless thing to do, a reckless afternoon spent with him in his bed, and she had told him that she had fallen in love with him. That is what she said to him, that she had fallen. She notices that there is a twitch or something sagging about his eye, as if the appraisal he is giving her is too heavy for his face to cope with, for his flesh to handle. And your hair, he says, short now, I see. She places her hands with the rings on the table and looks at them there. 40-odd years ago he had held them, these hands. He had kissed them. He had said they would meet up again as usual the following Friday, that he had found somewhere else to live, that they would be happy together, not to worry, that Mary wanted him out. She needed the room. She was only his landlady. He sits back in the chair. He is an old man now. She sees that. Old even before his time. She sees the sharpness of his collarbones, the length of his earlobes, the mottled, drooping skin along his jawline. You completed your training, he says. You must have done. I did, she says. Obstetrics. He seems impressed, or tries to seem impressed, and for a second she thinks she might tell him about the child, but he says, I didn't think you'd do it. I thought you'd, I don't know, give it up or something. I didn't think you had it in you. When she looks about this place, she can just about see it as it was. Perhaps she's even sitting in the exact same place as she sat all those years ago, waiting for him, sitting with 2 cups of dreadful coffee and stale scones, waiting. Perhaps she could, if she wanted to, bring to mind how it felt to sit there like that, having fallen in love. Perhaps she'll never forget that feeling of having fallen, and the dawning realization that as the coffees cooled, so had he, and of the things he'd never know. Good pension, though, he says. I bet you're well off. And he winks. He actually winks at her, and she lets herself gently fall back against the faux leather of the fixed seating. He hasn't even finished his tea, but he says he needs the loo. That's the phrase he uses, need the loo. Don't go anywhere, he says. He says it like a joke, and he stands up as if in sections from the seat, and he rubs his thigh, and he says, cramp, and limps slightly as he walks towards the washroom. The waitress appears immediately and asks if they need anything else. No, she says, thank you. I think I've had everything I need. She knows he'll be a while, because being an old man like he is, urination will take some time. She imagines his prostrate being an issue, and she imagines, anyway, he'd notice his reflection in the mirror above the wash-hand basin, surely, and he'd have to wipe away that clump of God knows what that had accumulated in the corner of his mouth. So she sits for a little while, listening to the clatter and laughter, and then she leaves. Before she does, she considers finishing her coffee, but decides against it. It is dreadful, the coffee, even now. Kerry Hadley-Pryce, superb, Fallen, and that's, you can find that online on Fictive. I'll post a link to that. Right, quickly, have we got any more guesses on the
No, not
counting?
really. No.
Just those first 4?
Oh, Robert, 3,000.
No. Okay, I mean, from the guesses so far, I've got someone who hasn't guessed it. They're quite close. I'm going to give you the final extract from this. My greyhound laddie's coming up for some love here, so bit of love for Laddie. Bit of love, everyone, for Laddie. I'm not going to lift him up, but he's a very beautiful greyhound, and I can't imagine life without him. Right, where are we? 30. Can you put the light on, Victoria, please?
Oh, Jim, Fogarty says 8,000.
No. I'll tell you. Oh, where's it gone? Where's it gone? I can't find this quote, but I can almost remember it, so I'm just going to give it to you. As I said, this is from an interview, and the author is being asked about his feelings about politics at the time, and he dismisses most of the questions. But then he says, I'll tell you what I really think about politicians. The other night, I was watching some politicians on the television, and they were discussing the Vietnam War. I wanted very much to burst through the set with a flamethrower, burn their eyes out, burn their old balls off, and then ask them how they would assess this action from a political point of view. Okay, so that's your final clue. We've got 5 minutes left, and I'm going to hit you with... Why has that come on? Go away. So I can only see some of you now. Right, this is from I found this on a floppy disk, and this was from a story that I wrote years ago, and I might turn it into a novel. It's called Full of It. It was the time when young able adults impersonate a pensioner's gate, when the ice on the pave is hidden and slows stuff down and makes it bright and whittles away at torpor. I had done the room, or it had done me. Old yellow pages, old benefit bills, old corks from wines that never dreamt of being vintage, happy to be here, no frills as I am, old love letters in a Boston box advertising mustard. All these, all old, all had gone their way, when in time there was no more junk to spare, no more to sally, none more I could have. And when it was all done and thrown away, I wondered whether new days would lead me. The phone rang. I let it do its stuff, away at the races, fractured and running out of juice, by itself. On the message there was a hairdryer. When I heard it back, it blacked out all the words. They were low and monotone emotion. The daughters of charisma lived nowhere near, or if they did, it was a gyro drop, no more, no less. Suddenly a need for cheese came upon me, some great thunderclap of hankering, like a magician leaving his rabbit. I sat down. I took it slowly, piece by piece, the tomato and then the cheese. It was blue Stilton, cheap stuff, natural amphetamine, so they say. I can't see it. You humour me, my old Madogan, there and afar, sending postcards, thinking it's like it was in your day, in wartime when it wasn't so violent. Outside there were words, the bloke on crutches and 8 cans of Strongbow with his son. The ice on the brick not yet begin to melt, on the tops of hedges the same. I stood up and thought about Madogan. I thought about playing the message back, but it was too broken and there wasn't time. It wasn't the weekend. I didn't need to lark about. I had no need to be strummy. It was about time to find people. What they wanted to do was up to them. Somehow it all felt false, all this needing to be bored so quickly, and for what? I rang Motson and he concurred. I should meet him. It's a good day. Take advantage. Taste advantage, I thought he said. I packed up and went out. At large, it felt lazy. All the lunchtime shoppers gone strong on the ale and able to take the time scraping the snow off the tops of a hedge on the way home. Would they do that if they had to take their gloves off? We met by the cathedral. I got there early and rang my wife. The message I left had the peal of the bells playing. She had played it back to hear them again, but now she had wiped it off. Strange, it is the bells and not the words you want to keep, those things that have been there before us by thousands of years. Motson always wore a crombie of some kind, and in summer I could spot him there amongst the crowds on the steps. But here now, with ice on those steps and no cameras, all the people that passed seemed to wear them. Motson's crombie looked old. I knew it was from last week, but I said nothing. It was clear that more people were coming. Motson said nothing, but I sensed it. There were stipulations on his room too, but it wasn't that. I didn't care, but in the town I felt buried by all this clear air and cold. The conversation paddled about a bit, but to no intent. Motson's concise style deliberately turned on its head to lose our pursuers. Something else? I bit my teeth together and drew the curtain back. In the courtyard, the dog made whining tracks in the air, and you thought that with its paws it must have done the same, like this for scot-free years, must have padded about like this for joy alone before it was tethered, apparently for a reason. There was a bakery nearby. I could hear the dog's pacings even out and calm when the smells of baked bread wafted through at 4. I'm going to leave it then because it's going to snap out. Any more guesses?
Let's see. Yes, Robert Powell 1300. Nobody else really. But Austin Kendrick says 2020.
I'm going to check this, but I think the winner is Saj because the answer is 370 and Saj guessed 400.
Okay.
But I'm going to check that. So I'll be in touch, Saj, and there will be a copy of Charlie's book coming your way from Repeater Books. And any guesses on the extracts?
Not Alistair Crowley then, said
No.
Louise. No guesses.
None?
No, not that I can see.
No. Okay, I'll have a look at that and I'll post later who that is. Keep coming with the guesses for that one if you wish. There's not going to be a Verbalist next week because my lad's going to see, it's the birthday of a dog he loves very much called Porridge. So we're going over to Birmingham where Porridge lives for his birthday. So I'm not around next Sunday. So it'll be the following Sunday, I think. But thanks a lot for tuning in. Please go back and read Kerry's story on Fictive. I'll post all the links and get hold of a copy of Charlie's books. And thanks for giving the love to all the other writing we've heard. Fran Lock, Daria-Ann, Martineau, and everything else we've heard today. And yeah. Is it going to snap it? We're going to wait for it next time. It's like cassettes. It's like when you used to make cassettes for people. The 45, it wasn't 45 minutes, was it? It was always about just shy of 48 minutes. So this will snap out any minute, but so far we've got 56. Worth knowing. Those lips. So where did you get those lips from, Victoria? Looking a bit Dali-esque to me.
Oh, and by the way, could you ask them who plays a character called Buck in which famous novel? Carrying on with the dog theme.
Who plays it? What is this? Another quiz?
No, who is Buck?
Who's Buck?
In a very famous book.
Who's Buck in a book? Okay, we've got a prize for that.
No, but do you know?
We'll find a prize if you know. But people are just going to hit Google, aren't they? And someone in this crowd will think, just Google it.
It's carrying on with the dog theme.
It's too easy.
Even in your extract, you had a dog.
Okay. Yeah, there were threads today. There were a couple of bakers in today's episode. So any requests next time? Please keep tuning in. Although I'll probably keep doing this Bill Hicks styling until there's no one in the room left. But yeah, any poets that you want to hear, particularly what?
Just say goodbye.
Okay, right, yeah, I better.
Ta-ra!
I just wanted it to snap out, but yeah, I'm going to do this kind of like a proper neat ending. So thanks to everyone, and ta-ra, see you next time. Keep tuning in. So it doesn't end